Hello and welcome to ChooseFI. Today on the show, we're talking about frugality as a superpower. I think for a long time, frugality has been maligned in the personal finance community and even in the financial independence community. And we all like to think that we can out earn or there's some way to negotiate our salary or get a new job or upskill as the only path to FI. And I think obviously that is a significant part of it. But we're kidding ourselves if we don't think that frugality and saving money and being smart with our expenses plays a critical role. And certainly, in my estimation, the beginning role in your path to FI. So today, I'm bringing on two of my good friends. We have Jen and Jill from the Frugal Friends Podcast. And I was on their show a couple months ago, and it was just a rollicking good time. I had a ball chatting with them. And I knew that I had to have them on really to talk about this superpower of frugality. I think you're really going to enjoy this. So with that, welcome to ChooseFI. All right, I wanted to start with our review of the week. So I'd really appreciate if you could send a podcast review in. Just go to ChooseFI.com/review or on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Just hit review. Would love it if you could give us 5 stars and a written review, and then just send it in to me. The easiest way is to get on my newsletter. So ChooseFI.com/subscribe. And when you hit reply to that email, every single time it comes to me directly, and I read every single one of these. So I really would appreciate it. And Garish wrote in, and the title was Long Overdue Review. Words cannot accurately describe how my life has changed when I was introduced to this podcast, but I will give it my best shot. My entire philosophy and mindset about money has changed for the better. The hosts and guests that come on the show have definitely impacted not only our lives, but my children's life and people in my immediate family. For the last 3 years or so, I've told about the concept of FI and the principles to anyone and everyone that I come across. I recommend books like The Simple Path to Wealth, Psychology of Money, Die with Zero, and many more. We've optimized our life and gotten started on our journey to FI. I intently listen and look forward to every episode and the weekly newsletter. I've implemented so many tips, techniques, and strategies that I learned while listening to other people on the show. And I got introduced to some amazing humans like Tim Ferriss, Derek Sivers, and the fantastic podcast Catching Up to FI. I can go on, but the impact, Brad and Jonathan, the value that you add to people's lives without charging money is commendable. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart. I thank you for tirelessly putting out episodes every week and the newsletter. Thank you, Brad, Jonathan, and to every guest that adds tremendous value with your thought process and perspective. And wow, that is just remarkable. Almost tearing up here reading that. So that is amazing. Thank you so much for sending that in. And with that, let's get into the show. So Jen and Jill, welcome. I'm so excited to have you here. This should be fun.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having us. And to follow that review, it's like so much pressure. But I hope that we can
Brad,
live up
Jonathan,
to the
and all the guests.
Until Jen and Jill.
No.
It's so good to be here, Brad. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, this should be fun. So we could go any number of ways, but I want to start just with how each of you conceptualize frugality. Because like I said at the outset, I think it's been maligned. It's been talked ill of in the financial world and even the financial independence world in the last couple of years. So give me the pitch. You're the Frugal Friends Podcast. What's the pitch for frugality?
Yeah. So, I mean, as someone who has written about FIRE and experienced the high savings rates and all the things that pursuing financial independence entails, we started Frugal Friends 5.5 years ago when I was kind of like really deep into that. And so we started it with the desire to help people save money in their journeys because it's math, right? The lower your expenses are, the more money that you have to invest, right? And so at the time, this was, 2017, 2018, like extreme frugality was very popular. People loved to see how little they could spend. And over time, that lifestyle has shown to be not the greatest. It definitely doesn't provide for the most fun. And so over the last 5-6 years, we've kind of evolved what our definition of frugality is to not really to be, quote unquote balance, but more of holding the tension between saving for the future that you hope happens and living in the fullness of today because tomorrow isn't promised. And so, with that in mind, we've defined it as the good stewardship of resources. So, obviously, money is the most obvious resource that we have to get the things that we want and need. But most of the things that we truly want in life actually can't be purchased with money. They touch money in some way, but the things that we want most are the things that money can't buy. So we also have to be good stewards of our other resources. So time, our physical space, our natural resources, our mental capacities, mental energy. So it's being a good steward of all of those resources so that you can take the fullest advantage of what you have today while still creating margin to live your fullest life in the future as well.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So it is a balancing act, and it sounds like it has evolved also. I'm curious, so you said maybe that lifestyle wasn't the greatest, but yet it evolved. So that brings to mind like the negative side of potential deprivation in terms of frugality. And I think a lot of people have been there where it tipped too far over the line. So clearly we're saying there is a massive place for frugality, but it's trying to stay on the positive line of that deprivation mindset. Am I hearing you right?
Yeah, I think that sometimes we can or have in the past approached frugality as a means to an end. Like, I will implement the behaviors of frugality until I get to XYZ point, and then life may or may not look different for me. And I think for Jen and I, we have more so adopted frugality as a lifestyle that is not on that borderline, what we would call cheap. Cheap being where we are taking advantage of people in order to save a dollar, save a penny. It's not actually being a good steward of all of our resources. And so, yeah, a balancing act, but that's, I think, why we sometimes choose to talk about the tension or living in the middle of these different extremes of either extreme savings, extreme low spending to no spending, or I'm spending everything and I'm not worried about the future at all. Life is short, so let me enjoy it now. And rather finding what's a kind of a both and rather than an either or is where we are finding the actual living out of frugality, where we don't have to either deprive ourselves or overindulge, which of course is a process for every single one of us and needs to be individualized. But we certainly do not like deprivation for deprivation's sake. There's times where we need to sacrifice, but that feels so much different when it's an informed sacrifice rather than just saying no to ourselves for no reason.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. And the way almost describing like it's not a means to an end. And my thought immediately went to like a diet or a financial diet, or really the best way to describe it is short-termism, right? You're thinking about something as, oh, this is just for a short period of time. I'm going to deprive myself. I'm going to reach some little goal or intermediate goal. And then that's it. I can go to hell with myself in essence, right? Like as opposed to building a lifestyle, as you said, frugality as a lifestyle. And Jill, I wanted to just dive in a little bit more. So you're talking about like that living in the middle and that tension. And you also said it's a process, right? Like, okay, so somebody's listening to this and maybe they're just getting started on their path to FI. Or frankly, maybe they're on one of those extremes in that extreme deprivation or the extreme spending. Like, how do they undertake this process? Are there steps? Is it just you have to live it out yourself? Or like, how do you advise people basically?
Absolutely. I think we are sold a binary in pretty much every aspect of life, you name it, finances, literally anything else. There's this either or, either this or that. And more often, there's usually a third option, sometimes four, five, six options that aren't at either extreme. But specifically, when we're talking about our finances, I think we can just start with building awareness and curiosity about ourselves before we even try to shift behaviors, patterns of relating. We can be curious, what are the extremes that I either am believing, or it's either this or that I feel drawn to? Do I identify primarily as a saver or a spender? Am I constantly impulse purchasing, or am I constantly saying no to myself? in whatever aspect of life, this can be a question that we are asking ourselves on a regular basis. We can also look to our actual transactions. One of the things that we encourage people to do, especially as it relates to this intersects with what we talk about a lot of values-based spending. That's kind of that next step of, well, then what do we do with our money? But we can go back through and look at our 90 days of transactions. So the past 3 months, take a look at what did we spend on? And this includes fixed and discretionary expenses. It's going to reveal to us the extremes that we may be drawn to. And then from there, we can continue in the process of asking ourselves questions of, well, did I enjoy these things? Is this congruent with the things that I say matter to me, that are valuable to me? Did this actually meet a need, or was I then continually searching for that next thing because that wasn't actually fulfilling, or that did deprive me, or hey, that gave me a lot of joy. I found a lot of value in that. And that's the first step, first couple of steps. And then being able to define, where do I want to spend money? For me, I've been able to realize that I value spending money on going out with people and being in community with others far more than I value things. So I have been able to ruthlessly say no to just shopping for the sake of shopping. I would rather go get a nice meal with people. And that is an example of where that process led me to. It's not just saying no to everything because spending's bad. It's, how do I spend well and in alignment with the things that I value? That's not extreme. It's holding the tension between having a good time and spending on the things that I actually feel good about spending on.
Yeah. No, I like that. So, right, this values based spending. And I don't know, there might be more there for us to dive into, but that was a really great intro to this. And it's just being aware. I think so much of this, so much of personal finance, so much of the financial independence journey starts with awareness. Like you said, going through 90 days of transactions, being truthful to yourself, maybe for the first time ever when it comes to your personal finance, just seeing it in black and white. And I think that's really important. And then, like you're saying, Jill, just being cognizant of, hey, what do I actually spend on? Is this bringing me joy? Is it bringing me satisfaction? Am I just doing it out of habitual, like hamster wheel type thing? Or does this make sense to me? And Jen, I wanted to double back to you because I think, and I might be reading too much into this, but it sounded a little autobiographical about like your personal journey of maybe being too frugal. And I know you've been a listener actually of ChooseFI for a very long time and a member of the financial independence community. I'm curious, how do you think about your own journey? Like, where did it start and what caused you to make changes?
Yeah. So it was more my husband that is super frugal. And I am the person who wants to spend money and wants to go out with friends and spend on my values and spend on things I don't value. I would love to do that. And so it really started with when my husband and I got engaged, gosh, 9 years ago at this point. He wanted to pay off his student loans. I had double the amount of student loan debt than he did, and felt kind of guilty about it. And so after a journey of him getting me on board, we ended up paying off $78,000 of debt in 2 years. And that was very quick, especially for the amount of money we made. He was unemployed twice during those 2 years. I was only half employed. So we went very hard. You know, that's what we were told we were supposed to do. And that's what we did. So after that 2 years, I felt proud that we had accomplished stuff, but I kind of had this debt payoff hangover. I really didn't know what to do. I mean, I knew what I was supposed to do, but I really felt kind of lost. And so that's when I turned to podcasts like ChooseFI and Stacking Benjamins and Paula Pant. And y'all had like a more than you guys will ever know, as much as I talk to you, like huge impact in where I went from there, because I went from following somebody else's plan for me blindly, what somebody else said that I should do, and started thinking for myself. But I was still in the habit of like going really hard financially. And so that's why pursuing FI attracted me, because it was something I could just switch my efforts to. So I did that for about 2 more years while I learned what it meant to live in the radical middle between saving and living, between spending on what I value and saying no to what I didn't. This was for the first 2 years of paying off debt, I just said no to everything. And then when I actually had to think for myself about, okay, this is my life now. My life isn't just some arbitrary financial goal. What do I want? What do I really want to do with my money? And so it took being laid off from work when I could no longer max out every single retirement account for me to really dive in and understand that frugality is not a means to an end. It's not a race to the bottom of spending, but it can be freeing in that I can know what I want and I can spend on that without guilt. Because I was making budgets and giving myself, a quote unquote budget to spend on things that I wanted, but I would still feel guilty about it because I would say, I should probably be investing this money. It's not being optimized fully. And finally, I had this reset where I could say, like, tomorrow isn't promised. My job isn't promised. And this is great that I have savings to cover this. It's freedom to pursue other things. But am I going to fully embrace that freedom, or am I going to be stressed because now my savings rate has been like slashed? So that was a whole like existential crisis that kind of led me to this transformation in the way I wanted to live. And I didn't want to just make money for the sake of making money so that I could invest it. I wanted to live fully, embrace all my gifts and hobbies and relationships, and spend money without guilt, but also feel really good about the way I was spending money. So being able to say no to things that I didn't fully agree with or didn't 100% align with my values, and really be able to use the skills that I had been adopting over 4 years.
Wow, Jen, that is quite an answer. I almost, that almost feels like the energetic end of the podcast there. But obviously, considering we're 15 minutes in, I think we have to keep going. But yeah, it's amazing the transformation of how I wanted to live. And you're saying like all of these things. I'm furiously writing this down. Live fully, saying no to things that you didn't align with. Like that is the superpower that we're here to talk about. That is it in a nutshell. It's remarkable. And Jill, I wanted to give you some space if you wanted to respond to anything that Jen just said, but she mentioned in there budgeting. I'm curious what your thoughts are on budgeting. Is that something that's part of your life? Like, how do you think about values-based spending and the intersection of budgeting?
Yeah, I do budget. I love budgeting. We certainly talk about it with our community and listeners, but we also love to encourage people to find what works for them. I know that there's plenty who are really turned away from that kind of concept. Like, a budget feels limiting and it feels like deprivation, and I don't want anything to do with that. And so sometimes we'll call a budget a spending plan. That does sound better to me. What's my
That does sound pretty good.
spending plan? Because the reality is, no matter how frugal or even borderline cheap you may be, you still have to spend money. If you're breathing air, you are spending some way, somehow, even if it's minimal. And I think we can so heavily focus on saving, how to save, how to invest. That's great. It's necessary, but that's just one side of the coin. We also need to know how to spend well. And I think that's a skill many of us, myself included, were not taught growing up or even tried to learn into adulthood. And so I think something like a budget, something like a spending plan, it can be an app, a spreadsheet, just a piece of paper and a pen in your pocket, but utilizing the tools and resources that are going to be most helpful, most beneficial, most efficient for us to know how can we spend well and get better at that skill. It is a skill set that we can improve and build upon, and a budget can be a tool to get us there. However, there's also a reality to coming to a point where you are so aware and intimately connected with the amount of money you're bringing in and the amount of money going out that you don't need to be in spreadsheets all day long, and you don't have to be tallying every transaction. You could look at your transaction to make sure that there's no errors once a month and be done with it. It just depends on your personhood and makeup and what's going to work for you. So yeah, I like a budget, but we're real loosey-goosey with it too.
Nice. Yeah, it's funny. Budgeting has just never been really part of my life. I have always, I guess, been fortunate enough, I guess, to be naturally frugal. And I don't know, budgets have And maybe it's just a limiting belief or like this weird connotation in my mind of like, it's just very limiting or like, it just seems like unnecessary busy work for me because I think like I try to live and exhibit that values-based spending and everything seems to fall into line. But frankly, like, and going back to what you're talking about, like going through 90 days of transactions, like no matter who we are, there are times where you fall back into kind of some mindless spending. And I know I've recently, I've read up a little bit on my own frugality. And sometimes I look at my credit card bill, I'm like, what is going on here? What just happened? And I'm curious, like, as you think about it, is it like, hey, we set this plan in place, but then we do revisit it every X number of months, X number of years? Like, how often in your own lives, and I guess Jen, we'll start with you, how often do you like revisit your budget or your values-based spending? Like, is this something that you're touching back on? Or are you just kind of on like an autopilot of frugality?
Yeah. So I'm like you, Brad. I actually don't budget. It's not that it feels restrictive, it's that I have spent a long time kind of honing the values that I have. And I also have a little PTSD from doing so much budgeting when we were paying off debt and trying to save all of our money. And so I have used the skills that I've learned, over those past 8 9 years. And we just save first and spend what's left, basically. But I think the 90-day transaction history, I think it's almost more valuable once you get to this point than trying to live by a strict budget because you're looking at those mindless transactions. You're looking at, okay, what are the things that maybe I'm growing into value? So as my kids get older, I'm valuing different things than when like my first son was a baby. And so like what are the things now that I'm loving doing with him that I really couldn't do when he was 2 years old? Like we just started soccer with him and that's something that I'm very excited to spend money on. So looking and you don't realize that your values are changing or evolving unless you're looking back at it maybe once a year, maybe twice a year, depending on how much you love spreadsheets and that sort of thing. Some people just love spreadsheets and tracking, and that's awesome. Like, hopefully, maybe if you're in a relationship, one person in the relationship does that. Neither me or my husband love budgeting or spreadsheets or any of that. So sometimes it feels like we're winging it, but it does behoove you to take time at least once a year to re-examine yourself. Re-examine, do I still value what I valued last year? How are my values evolving? And am I spending in alignment with what I say I value, what I want to value? And so you can make sure that you are on the path and you have the financial goals that are right for you and your family and not the financial goals that you're being influenced by on social media or by entrepreneurs and podcasts and or family members. These people can so easily influence our choices, and we just want to reset every so often so that we can make sure that we're on the path of our choosing.
I revisit my budget a little bit more often than Jen does. Annual is great. Quarterly is better. Monthly is excellent. Again,
Bi-weekly is Jill.
yeah. I definitely am looking at my money, my transactions, all of these things bi-weekly for sure. She's not wrong. But your question, Brad, of kind of reevaluating our goals, because some of what I'm doing is a little bit more autopilot, making sure there's not errors, making sure I'm on track. Are there small tweaks that need to happen? And recognizing that month to month, we're dynamic people, all of us. Our lives shift with every month, with every season. And our expenses can shift. We may have fixed expenses, but month to month, there's parties, weddings, holidays, vacations. And I do think we need to factor those things in. I think it's one of the reasons we can become so deflated with our budgets is thinking that they're this static thing that are not going to change month to month. So giving ourselves space to, there may be some months where my investing is higher and some months where it's lower. For me, though, beyond that, one of the things I like to keep a pulse on is anytime there is a shift, whether small, medium to large, revisiting. And this correlates to one of what we believe is a core foundational principle of frugality, which is honoring your season. Jen alluded to this already with recognizing where she's at with two young children and married and renovating a house and having a rental, what that means for her finances and her current goals. Sorry, I'm talking about you like you're not here. Is going to be
Right.
different than when they're older. And likewise for my husband and I too. Right now, we don't have children. We are homeowners, but just being able to label those very basic things can help us identify what does that then mean for our financial goals. We recently decided to make a change in, well, I did. And I brought my husband along with me, that I'm making some changes with my jobs and career. And for a season, that's going to mean that I am bringing in less income with the hopes that it'll be more in the future. But that's going to bear weight on my budget. So I have got to be aware of what's happening in my life season and tweaking my spending, maybe even my savings and investing to correlate with what's happening for me currently, and giving myself the freedom and permission to do that, that it is okay. Even if we killed it in the previous quarter, that if life changes by choice or by maybe not your choice, there's freedom to not save as much, not invest as much, maybe have to spend more, maybe spend less because of what's happening in the environment around you. So that's another kind of big picture thing that will prompt us to revisit not just, oh, what did we spend on recently, but hey, are our goals and rates of saving and investing still aligning with where we're at currently?
Wow. Yeah, that is absolutely brilliant. And each time you talk, one of you, I want to double back. There's like 5 things I want to ask about before we move on. So I'm going to take a pause here and try to go back to some of these things. So first, honoring your season. I love that. I think it's so important. I think it also allows you to give yourself some grace, where so many of us are on this race, what it seems like. And I don't think it should be that way, but that's how it is, this race to FI. And honoring the season, your season, right? Like understanding that, like how I look at it also is like life is lumpy sometimes, right? Like you were talking about like these random expenses. Like if you just annualize your expenses for every like trailing 2-week period, you'd get wacky stuff, because sometimes, like you said, a wedding comes up and you have a hotel and a trip and a gift and all this stuff. Like that's okay. Your budget isn't blown. That's why like I like to look at it in terms of an annual thing, and understanding that life is lumpy and things come up all the time. But more importantly, like Jen, you're saying your son is playing soccer, which just sings to my soul. That's my my all-time favorite sport. But like my kids are year-round swimmers, or they used to be, and like that is very, very expensive, and they love it. They really enjoyed it. They're not doing it any longer, and that's fine too. That's yet another season. But we didn't sit there and bemoan how much it cost. We paid it because they love it, and we're in a fortunate position where that's not breaking the bank, right? And also my kids aren't getting any younger. They're 15 and almost 12, and I'm spending more now than I've ever spent in my entire life, but that's okay. It's okay. You know, my net worth I've saved for so long, like this, my wife and I, and like this is okay. And we're going to look back on these years as some of the best years of our life, and to have missed out on some of these adventures, the roller coaster trips, or the going to see Taylor Swift, or we're going to Europe next year to see Taylor again. These are expensive things, but they're so worth it.
It's so true. I think sometimes we think it's a money and a math problem, but very often it's more of a mental capacity, freedom, permission, grace problem, more than do we actually have the money, but can we give ourselves the permission to spend on this guilt free?
Yeah. And it's also a resources issue, right? You talked earlier about good stewardship of resources, time being the most important one to a large degree. And this season is finite. You think about, like, for me, having my not so young daughters in the house, this season is finite, right? So it's very important to be cognizant of these seasons in life, I think. So thank you for bringing that to the attention of everyone. Again, it's just so important. So, okay, like I said, I'm going to double back to each of you for something. So, Jen, I'm going to kick myself if I don't ask you, how did you pay off $78,000 in student loan debt in 2 years?
Oh, wow. Have you heard of Dave Ramsey?
I have heard of Mr. Ramsey.
Actually, I will say the first episode I ever listened to ChooseFI was the one that you did about the baby steps.
Oh, wow. Way back. I think
Yes.
that was like episode 7 or something.
Yes. And so actually, we did a very similar one like 2 years ago because I was like, you know what? I think it's so far back in the ChooseFI archives. I think it's time for us to do our own. And it was, gosh, we've never gotten more 1-star reviews on
Oh,
any
I'm sorry.
other episode.
But we knew
It
it.
was
That's
very-
all right. Eyes wide open.
Yeah, it was so tastefully done, and it's fine. But we really subscribed to that mentality of beans and rice, rice and beans, no restaurants. We went hard. And part of it was I wanted to be done sooner so I could go back to spending money. I didn't yet have this concept of the radical middle, of not being extreme. Being extreme was my personality type at that time. I would no longer describe extremes as a personality type. But that's what we did. We just went all in. And that's how I ended up with that debt payoff hangover at the end. Because when you make a financial goal your identity and then you reach it, what's your identity at that point? And so I had to kind of refigure out, okay, what's my identity? It cannot be a goal. It can't be any financial, health, education, business goal. Who am I outside of these goals? And I know that doesn't really say how we paid off the debt, but meal planning and making a grocery list and doing potlucks with our friends instead of restaurants and all the boring stuff that you've heard before. That's what we did. And we did it. We just chose to do it every day. And it was very helpful that I had somebody literally in my corner in my house that was as committed to it as I was, because I think community is the unsung hero of reaching goals. If you can have a partner, not just for accountability, but gosh, commiseration and encouragement. So that was really those are the things that we did. And we did a lot of side hustles, and we did everything we could to increase the margin between income and expenses.
Nice. And then just funneled every single dollar essentially to paying off
Mhm.
that debt. Okay. And so Jonathan somewhere is screaming at me because he had an encyclopedic knowledge of all the episode title numbers. So episode 5 was the Dave Ramsey episode. So it wasn't 7.
Oh
I
my
got it wrong
gosh,
there.
yep.
So it's why everyone needs Dave Ramsey and why you should ignore him. It's still the episode holds up. It's pretty good.
Yeah.
Don't give us a 1-star review, but
I know. I tried to make it as similar to yours as possible, but just updated between, because I think that one came out in 2017.
Yeah, early January 2017.
And ours was 2021. I can't remember the title or number of ours.
Yeah. And the good thing is we were, I think, very complimentary to Dave. I think obviously I have some significant disagreements with how hardline he is. I think he helps tens of millions of people and has just been a remarkable good for society at large. Of course, there is a natural end to it, right? And I think some of the dogma is a little much, to put it mildly, but nevertheless, very positive general thoughts on Ramsey, I'll say. But you talked about the dangers of identity. And I think that you kind of skirted past that and you're like, oh, but we did potlucks, we did this, we did that.
Yeah.
The dangers of identity is so important.
I know. I tend to focus on that. One time we shared our debt payoff stories because Jill has one as well. And we did episodes on that. And then I got an email after mine saying that I didn't say the steps that I took to pay off debt. I talked more about the identity and that stuff. So now I just caveat with, I learned how to meal plan. That's what I did.
Right.
But yeah, to do it as quote unquote gazelle intense as is recommended in that method, you do have to make your identity. And I don't necessarily agree with that anymore. I think technology and I think the economy and just culture in general has drifted so far away from the capabilities of doing that method the way it was created in, the late 80s. I think it's much more out of touch than it was. And so it has to change. And if the method's not going to change, the execution's got to change. So you've got to change and do the things that work for you. You can't make a financial goal your identity. It's just not going to work because then you're going to reach it and it's not going to solve the problems you think it's going to solve. You're still going to have problems. So find some other identity and just work on financial goals in addition.
Yeah, the identity, it's so important. And like you said, like it can't be a goal because what happens when you reach it? Who are you then? It can't be a job. What happens when you retire or leave or get fired? It can't be success at X, even like a sport. I think of Olympic athletes, right? Like even if you reach a gold medal, what happens then? Who are you? Right? Like there's nothing left. If that's all there is, if it's that goal, if it's that thing, what are you left with when you lose that or you stop or you reach it? And so I like to look at like an identity statement of I'm the type of person that dot dot dot, and then you fill it in with something. That's obviously but one of a million different ways to think about identity. But like I'm the type of person that, and then
Likes to eat hot dogs.
yeah, sure.
That's Jill. That's Jill. She's that type of person.
It's a goal and identity.
But that's an action, right? If you can relate your identity to actions versus achievements, then it's a much healthier way to think about yourself because actions you can control, actions you can do or choose to not do. Because what's worse than putting your identity in a goal, what's worse than reaching it is not reaching it. What if your circumstances and your seasons make it so that you cannot? Like once I started learning about frugality, I kind of started making my business my identity. It was an unhealthy cycle. I'm out of it now, but it took a long time. And so like I was watching all my peers doing 6-figure months or at least 5-figure months and doing $1 million in a year with their business. And I couldn't. For some reason, I didn't know the things that they knew or didn't want to do the things they did. And I just didn't know why I wasn't doing as well as these other people. And so to have that business be my identity and not be able to do the arbitrary achievement that I wanted to achieve, like that was crushing. And it was even worse.
Yeah, it's all very, very interesting. It's certainly like this inner work that we need to do on ourselves and thinking about identity. And there's no easy answer, certainly. But Jill, I want to ask you ultimately about frugality and minimalism because I'm kind of curious about that. But I did want to just touch on that one question, the lingering question that I have. So, okay, what are you looking at your budget every 2 weeks? Wait, so you said that in passing. What are we doing here? Like in a very tactical way. I don't mean this in a making fun way. Like it's super tactical. Obviously,
she's looking at how much she spent on hot dogs.
It keeps coming back to the hot dogs.
Wishing I would have bought more hot dogs.
Yeah.
Do we have a favorite brand of hot dogs?
Nope.
No.
Because whatever was on the floor of the rendering plant doesn't need to be fancy.
Oh my goodness! But realistic. So I don't know where to go from there. But
yeah. I'll tell you.
So every 2 weeks, I track my money. Like I think I like to say that I look 10 minutes a month, but I log into my bank account. I'm just quickly glancing. I still do the old school like check register and stuff, like ridiculous, like dinosaur type stuff.
Yeah.
So I get the tracking, but like talk me through it.
Sure. So my husband and I get paid every 2 weeks. So it follows with our pay periods that once we're paid, it almost starts a new cycle. So I have a spreadsheet. I'm not doing the apps. They're not doing it for me. So it does include me looking through all of our transactions and logging them. You can put me on a watch list. It's okay. But it's amazing how many times I come across errors in what was this expense? This was an error. This was charged twice. It's not every single time, but at least a handful throughout the year that causes me to then be able to call the company or the place that the sale happened and be able to write that expense. And from there, we do live below our means. So it's a variable amount that I'm then able to put into savings. For me, I approach it a little bit different in that I'm kind of looking back at what was spent and now what's left over at the end of these 2 weeks that I can then funnel into savings and investing. I have various sinking funds for what's happening throughout the year. And so I can kind of decide and gamify it truly. I just like putting challenges in my head of I want to get to this number and I want to reach this number. So I might decide various percentages that I'm going to funnel to my different buckets of sinking funds. And it's just kind of fun for me being able to see where am I at in my savings goal for travel this upcoming year? How much do I have left to go to save for the holidays? And it's enjoyable for me. So that's what I'm doing every 2 weeks.
That's very cool. Okay, so you, as I'm conceptualizing this, you have kind of like a floor amount you keep in, let's say, your main checking account. And then it's basically the prior 2 weeks, whatever is essentially left over, then you manually put in to investments in some level or these sinking funds. And if you could explain sinking funds for the audience, just in case people are unfamiliar with that, and where you keep that money.
Absolutely. So sinking funds just being essentially savings buckets that you intend to spend, usually for the more shorter to midterm goals. So for instance, for me, I have a sinking fund for travel. That's usually to last me throughout the year. I've got a sinking fund for medical expenses. So I like to keep it at or around whatever my deductible is. So as I utilize it, I try to refill it back up again. I've got a sinking fund for car expenses, these types of things that we know are going to happen. And we'd love it to not have to come out of just our checking account or feel like this catastrophic event that happened and where's the money coming from. So as I go along, I kind of put the money away that I can then pull from throughout the year.
Interesting. So, okay, a very like tactical question on this, because I'm sure somebody's wondering. So, what happens if you are filling up your travel sinking fund throughout the year, but you take your trip on January 15th? I guess at the beginning, did you set up like a balance and then you pull from it that first year and then you're appropriating for the next year? Like, I know it sounds silly, but I'm sure there are people that are really curious about this.
Yeah, sure. It rolls over, honestly. And for me personally, not everybody has to approach it in this way, but I like to pull from it and then replenish it when I'm able. So, for instance, I have about $2,000 in my travel fund. I haven't touched it. Even though I've gone on some vacations since then, I've been able to pay for $100 plane tickets just out of my checking. I'm more so right now going to keep that aside for a bigger trip that I might do. But let's say I pull 500 from it. If over the next couple of months after that trip, I'm able to put $50 back in, $100 back in. So it's a little bit more of a revolving bucket than it's a bring it down to zero by December 31st and then raise it back up. And then to answer your second part of that question, I keep it in a high yield savings account.
Okay, nice. Yeah, it's amazing nowadays that there are actually high yield savings accounts paying 5%. It's wild,
It's
right?
so great.
Oh my gosh, I know. I'm so glad they're back. So nice. I remember when
Right?
they were 0.6%. We're back to the good old days.
Yeah, I never thought I'd say it. I remember, like, this certainly dates me, but my first job in 2001, ING Direct was like the first online savings account. And it was like 5.1%. It was something crazy,
Ooh.
and it never, for the last 20 years, it hasn't even come close to approaching that. I thought those days were gone. And now to see something like CIT Bank at like 5.05 at the last I looked
Mm-hmm.
at, it's like, damn, this is amazing. So yeah, it pays to be a saver again. I like it. And Jill, I wanted to actually double back and ask about minimalism, right? So I mentioned a couple of minutes ago. I'm curious about the intersection of frugality and minimalism and how you think about minimalism. I think there's a story in your past here that could be rather interesting for the audience.
Yeah. So we believe, to add in another word, of simplicity, that minimalism kind of falls under the umbrella of simplicity. And that being another one of the foundational principles of frugality, that wherever we can identify areas that we can simplify and become more efficient and limit the amount of decision fatigue that's happening for us in all aspects of our resources, right? Where we can simplify mental and emotional energy spent unnecessarily, where we can simplify our finances, simplify our physical space. This is all going to help us because we are whole people and all aspects of our personhood is going to intersect with one another. And so we've talked about some of the ways that we can simplify our finances, where we can keep our savings buckets and all of that, only looking at our budget once a month. But I think too, we can,
Heathens. Come on.
we can simplify our physical spaces. We can simplify our schedules. And all of this is going to have a positive impact and benefit to our finances. And so, speaking specifically of spaces, I certainly have lived a more minimalist lifestyle. I think that there's a spectrum to be seen here. I don't think that to consider yourself a minimalist, it has to include white walls, one plant, one chair. It can look a variety of different ways, but I think the goal is having enough and being content with that, kind of repelling this overconsumption for happiness or just buying for the sake of buying or because you've been sold something, but we mindlessly purchased it without even knowing, is this going to be for me? One of the ways that we lived minimally was living in an RV. So at one point we were in a motor home, my husband and I, and then at another point we lived in a kind of pull behind trailer. We actually ended up downsizing from the motor home to the trailer. The trailer was 170 square feet and could be pulled by our Toyota 4Runner. And that was literally everything we owned.
Oh,
That is
wow.
extreme. I'm not going to lie. I know that we say we don't advocate for extremes, but I think we can visit extremes for the sake of learning and discovery and self-understanding and for the benefits that it can provide, but we don't have to stay there. It doesn't have to be long-term. And for us, what that meant was just living and owning within our means. I'm sure you and your audience are very well aware of how much we can save when we look at our biggest expenses, like housing. And we were able to significantly reduce how much we paid for housing by owning these RVs, and then ended up being able to renovate them and sell them at a profit, which the first sale paid for my master's degree. The second sale was our down payment on our house. And so this was kind of our way of being efficient, simplifying, and practicing a more minimal lifestyle, learning what is it to be content with just a 1 foot by 2 foot closet. And how can I get creative and problem solve with my finances, with my resources? How can I achieve a low waste lifestyle? And what does that mean for then what's available to me? And for me and my husband, it certainly did not feel like deprivation. Certain parts of it were sacrifice, but what we gained in community, opportunity to spend time with people because we're not focused on cleaning and organizing our things every weekend, or what we were able to save in rent or mortgage costs was just phenomenal. So I know it's an extreme example, but we do think wherever we can get creative with simplifying, minimizing our space, our schedules, we can see great benefits to our whole personhood.
Yeah, that is really beautiful. And like you said, having enough and being content with that. That's just so important, right? How many people are not content with what they have?
And that's where frugality is a superpower, because I
Yeah.
think if implemented well, that's where you can come to that place. Not necessarily that you'll always stay there. We go in and out. Life is lumpy, as you said. But I think that we can get to a place where we are spending guilt-free. We're experiencing permission to spend on the things that we want and living a lifestyle that feels beneficial to us.
Yeah. And I love how you threw simplicity in there, right? So frugality, minimalism, and simplicity. And I think I literally was thinking about this morning because I saw some tweet on Twitter. And I was like, simplicity to me is the guiding principle of my life. Like that was what I hit on.
Mm.
I can't think of any aspect of my life where there's complexity that it makes any sense or adds any value. It's like I'm always searching for simplicity. I'm searching for the essence of something. And you think about even just, brass tacks or whatever they call it, like in terms of financial products, like think about any type of complex financial product. It's usually somebody selling you something or someone getting rich instead of you,
Mm-hmm.
right? Them basically stealing your money through complexity. Like there's no secret. There's no like, hey, you get wealthy and there's some secret complex thing that you get to invest in. Like that is all a mirage. It's simplicity, simplicity, simplicity. So thank you for highlighting that. And I love that you downsized to 170 square feet. That's amazing. And like you said, it doesn't have to be the extreme example. And I use a much less extreme example in my own life of moving. moving 400 miles away, moving from a high cost of living area to a low cost of living area. And like, I'm always a little bit sheepish about this because I don't want people to get the misimpression that you have to do something like that you can't possibly pursue FI in New York City or San Francisco Bay Area. You certainly can. It was just for our lives that move made all the difference in the world. And that was a values-based decision, really. It was based on how do we want to spend our time? What does our future life look like? It wasn't, oh, we have to get out of here because we just have to spend less money. So I think that's really, really critical. And speaking of values-based spending, Jen, I wanted to double back to you because I think this is a really important aspect. And like we talked about a while back, you need to really think about your values, right? And you need to just have a sense of, okay, what am I not? I don't want to spend mindlessly. I want to actually spend based on value. But what happens if sometimes your income just simply doesn't support all of your values? What do you do then? How do you prioritize?
Yeah, it's going to happen to everyone because I think we're so programmed to want to use money to solve our problems or meet our values. It's almost our first go to. But regardless of where you are, regardless of your income, everyone is going to want to do things that they can't, quote unquote, afford. You can't afford right now. It just depends on where your lifestyle inflation has gotten to. And lifestyle inflation is not bad. I think we vilify it, but it's only when that lifestyle inflation creeps above what your income is. So when there comes a point where you have multiple values that you've identified that you love spending on, but the margin between your income and expenses is not enough to support spending money on all of them, first, you look for places where the value is not being met 100%. So in my story, I value community almost over anything. Like I'll drop anything to go hang out with a friend, and I will spend money to be around people, to be around friends. And so that's something I really didn't want to give up. And I was spending, when we were starting to pay off debt, that was my biggest hang up. I didn't want to stop doing brunches on Sundays and happy hours on Fridays and going to movies and museums and all these things. But as we got started, I realized that it wasn't the brewery, it wasn't the museum, it wasn't the brunch that I valued, it was the community. And so how could I meet the true value of community without spending money? And honestly, those things that I was doing weren't fully getting me what I wanted. It's loud at bars. And so how much relationship building are you actually doing? So how could I fully meet my value and do it for free? And so that's where we started doing these these pantry challenge potlucks where we just got together with friends and everyone would bring a dish. But the challenge was you can't buy anything for your dish. It had to be from stuff you already had. Or we would just get a $3 bottle of Aldi wine and finish it and stuff like that. Like, how could we do it for low cost or free that was meeting the value 100%, focusing on the value, not the activity. But then there came stuff that really did cost money. And then I had to prioritize. The magic words for me were no but. Like, basically, but is the magic word. So if I'm asked to do something, so maybe contribute to a fund or a bridal shower thing that I actually can't afford right now. This is something where I say, I can't do this or I can't do what you've asked me, but how can I volunteer my time in some way? How can I volunteer my space in some way or my mental capacities? We're looking at all of our resources to kind of make up for the money that we don't have. I still want to participate, but what else can I do? And so we're getting creative and thinking, how can I meet this value? And we prioritize, right? So maybe I can put money towards this value this month, and the next month I'm doing something for another value, and I'm saying, this value that I spent on last month is lower on the list this month, so we don't get to do this. So I think getting creative, prioritizing, those are, kind of the attributes that when you build those, it becomes much easier to practice values-based spending.
Yeah, that's great. It's cutting to the essence of what are you trying to get out of life, out of a situation. And it doesn't have to be, like you said, going to the expensive brewery. If what you're actually looking for is to spend time and talk with your friends, it might actually be a negative. Just the brewery in and of itself might be a negative aspect, totally excluding the money factor, right? Because it's loud, you can't hear them, it's uncomfortable, whatever it may be. So try to find that essence. I really enjoy that. This has been such an interesting conversation. I have probably 2 pages of notes here, and I like just all of these incredible things that paint the case for frugality as a superpower, right? Like we're talking about value-based spending, the radical middle, this transformation of how I wanted to live life, all of these things, honor your season, so many, like over and over, having enough and being content with that. You have left us, both of you, with just so much to think about. I think this is really important because frugality is more than just deprivation. It's so much more. It is that superpower. It allows us to think about what do we want to get out of life. It's that simplicity, right? It's the minimalism. It's all of this combined. So, Jen and Jill, thank you for being here. If people want to reach out to you, I know we already mentioned the Frugal Friends podcast, but where can people reach you?
Yeah, anywhere you listen to podcasts, we're there, Frugal Friends Podcast. We also have a newsletter that's for free where we let people know about freebies that are happening every week, savings tips, money hacks. And you can get that just by going to our website, frugalfriendspodcast.com.
Nice. Frugalfriendspodcast.com. And yeah, I see here on every page, get the friend letter. I think that's what we're talking about, right?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, my friends. Well, until next time, I really appreciate you both coming on.
Thanks, Brad, for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.